What's up, good people? Welcome back to the garage. Today we're going to be back on the GS550, working on a little bit of a modification to my exhaust. It sounds pretty good, but I'm not terribly happy with the way that it looks currently. I bought it and I chopped it up to kind of get it to look the way that I wanted it to. The style that it had when it came from the manufacturer was just not something I was happy with, so I chopped it up. I've got it in the location that I want it, but the aesthetics of the exhaust aren't exactly perfect, let's say that. And so I've got an idea of how to help out with some of that. It's gonna be an experiment. I don't know if it's gonna work or if it's gonna go down in flames, but I'm willing to give it a shot, and if not, stick another pipe on there. But essentially, so I've been making a small repair to this Akrapovic silencer that I got from a buddy for a pretty decent price, and this one's covered in carbon fiber as well, so I figured may as well give it a shot, and I'm gonna try to cover this one in carbon fiber. Right now, as you can see, it has some, or maybe as you can see, it has some welds on there from where I chopped it up and kind of made it a little bit straighter than it was. It was kind of kicked up at an angle like that, and I wasn't terribly happy with it. So the way I've modified this and made it straight fits the bike again the way I want it, but these are kind of ugly. So I'm gonna try to address this ugly. And I also painted it with some high temp paint. You can see it's already like the slightest touch of anything scratches that paint off, and I'm not sure how well this is gonna heat cure. I've actually had the bike running with this on it and it didn't start curing at all. So that's one of the things that kind of gives me hope that the carbon fiber might actually work, just because it didn't get hot enough to cure this paint on here. So I'm hoping it doesn't get hot enough to melt the epoxy or, you know, make it smoke or whatever. It's not a high temp epoxy. I think I'm using West system, and I think it can withstand up to like 600 degrees, maybe. I don't know. I seem to remember seeing that somewhere. In any case, I'm gonna give it a shot. I'm gonna try to cover this baby in carbon fiber and see how it turns out. With that, let's just jump into it. All right, you can see here now that I've smoothed out this transition between those welds. It's still a little rough, so I think I'm gonna take some weld a little bit on that seam again and try to smooth it out a little bit more to clean up some of that transition a little bit further. But it looks a lot better than it did before. This one's pretty much all the way gone. It's just the voids in the weld that are left. So I'm gonna try to TIG it up a little bit and then smooth out the TIG weld, see if I can straighten out that transition a little bit more, and then we'll get started on trying to work on the actual carbon fiber skinning. Okay, as you can see, I have some epoxy on here now. Looks like I forgot to hit record on the camera before I got going, but I've got epoxy on there, and I mixed in some of this black dye And the purpose of that is whenever you're skinning a part, especially with this carbon fiber, you want to have the black base coat on there so that, for instance, this silver from the muffler doesn't show through in any sort of imperfections in the weave as you lay down the carbon. And so essentially you just want to get some epoxy on there, let it sit for a couple hours until it gets tacky, and then you start to lay the carbon over top of it. That really helps out a lot, especially like going into the exhaust here. I'm going to wrap it around so it tucks into the exhaust a little bit, so it's not just like a it doesn't just end at the tip there. I think that will look a little haphazard. And so if you try to do that just with a wet layup, it'll lift off of the part because that epoxy is not going to hold it down. So you give it a couple of hours and it'll get tacky, almost like a glue, like a contact cement or something. And then once you start to lay the carbon fiber on there, it'll hold it down better, especially as you go around corners and things like that. So we'll come back in a couple hours and then we'll start to lay the carbon fiber on this exhaust and continue our experiment here, see how it holds up. All right, so here now we have, this thing is tacky. And I want to get, so you can see like, it leaves a fingerprint in there and barely any comes off on my finger. I could probably let it sit a little bit longer, but I want to get as much time as I can trying to put the carbon on here. So what I'm going to do is, when this is mounted, this little mount that's on the pipe faces away from the outside of the bike. And so I want to put the seam on the inside of that. And then that way, hopefully the seam will be not quite as visible. So I'm going to put this way on this side and then roll it up. When you apply the epoxy, you want to kind of stipple it in there rather than brushing it, because if you try to brush it on, it'll pull at the weave and knock it out of place and move it from where you want it to be. And this step essentially creates a chemical lock with the layer of epoxy under the weave now that we allowed to get tacky. So this layer of epoxy will bond with that other layer of epoxy. All right, it's a new day, as is evidenced by the wardrobe change. And this is where we are. So it looks pretty good so far. But it's obviously not in a finished state. So what I'm gonna do is do a little bit of sanding to smooth out some of the surface imperfections. And then we'll put more coats of epoxy on here to make it uniform. So this part is just tedious, but needs to be done. Here we go. All right, so now you can see I've taped off the edge here, and I've left myself a little bit of extra room, and I'm gonna take this Dremel and just trim off this excess material here. And then that way we've got bare metal mating to the mid pipe on the bike. Again, I don't know if this epoxy is gonna hold up to heat or not. And so I wanna give it as much of a chance as possible. So to try to divorce that direct heat from the actual part that has the epoxy on it and the part that has packing on the inside. So I'm gonna trim off some of this, and then we'll test fit it up on the bike again and take a look and see how it looks on the bike. All right, that's it for this short video here. I really just wanted to walk you through the process of skinning that silencer in carbon fiber. I think it turned out pretty nicely. I still have to spray paint the raw metal with a little bit of high temp black paint so it doesn't rust. And then we'll be done there. See if it melts or see if it holds up. The next video we'll be actually jumping on the XSR, doing a little bit of modification and installing a Krapovich full system and an FT-ECU flash tune kit. So hit the notification bell, subscribe, thumbs up, and we'll see you next time. Peace.